What's going on, y'all? It's your boy Cool Colas here, and you are now tuning into a new video on my channel. But before we get on to the topic for today, I would love it if you did a few things. Hit the like button, subscribe button, share button, and bell icon so you get notifications for whenever I come out with new content on this channel. And then when you are finished watching this video, leave me a comment below. That way I can get back to whatever it is that you had to say about this topic. For today's topic, I want to talk about a new category that I have not discussed yet on this channel. I want to get into some videos where I'm really breaking down these classic black movies that we used to watch back in the day growing up. And I want to talk about who was the movie villain versus the real villain. And today I'm going to be breaking down who the movie villain versus the real villain was for the movie Baby Boy. So let's get into it. Out of all the popular classic black movies that are out there, Baby Boy is actually my favorite out of the bunch. And anybody who knows me personally knows that I pretty much can quote this movie by heart. I can quote this movie almost line by line. I've seen it that much. And the main reason why I've always liked it is two things. Number one, this movie was really a comedy that was trying to come off like a drama. It was almost so bad that it was good and it was funny. I also like the concept of it, and I like the inclusion of Frances Cress Welsing in the very beginning of the movie when she was talking about the concept of why the black man is described as a boy and how that goes into the psychology of the way that we think about ourselves and the black man in America because of the system of white supremacy. And I thought that was very interesting. And looking back, I was like, this really is kind of a psychological analysis. And it, from my perspective, honkers down more on this idea that a lot of the movies that we see and a lot of the television series that we see aren't just a form of art where we're watching it for entertainment, enjoyment, relaxation, or whatever the purpose is that you're watching this thing for. But a lot of times it is a piece of indoctrination that teaches you to think in a certain way. That's why they tell the stories in a certain way where they want you to be mad at a certain character, not like a certain character, but also to ignore some of the other pervasive issues that are there. And these are things that are just less talked about. And so, as I said before, I want to go into this idea with these black classic movies where I talk about who the real villain was versus who the movie villain was, because there's a certain way that the dominant society wants you to see the movie. And there's a certain way there's also a certain way that they want you to see certain characters. They will emphasize who they want you to see as a villain. And they will emphasize who they want you to see as somebody who is a sympathetic character or more so a heroic character. They also want you to focus on who they want you to see as the most heavily flawed. But the problem with this is that it is biased, and they often are purposefully trying to get you to not pay attention to all the other context clues that are hardly focused on in this movie. For those of you all who have watched this movie all the way through, you know that the villain of this movie, the movie villain that is the character Rodney, who is played by Snoop Dogg. And he's essentially this gangster who was an ex of Yvette's, who has a certain level of jealousy towards Jody. And at some point, he attempts to SA her. And as a result, Jody tries to get revenge on him, and that turns into a big thing. And they already didn't like each other because, once again, he was jealous of Jody. So the movie wants you to pay attention to two things. One, this idea of Jody basically being a bum, Jody being this ain't shit Negro, Jody being a fuckboy. They want you to pay attention to that. The other thing they want you to pay attention to is that the villain of this movie is an individual who causes conflict for Jody and Yvette, because Yvette is seen as the love interest in this movie. But my belief is that the real villain of this movie is Juanita. And if you do not know who Juanita is, that is Jody's mother. This movie, just like the world, has what I would call a Frankenstein effect. If you all kind of understand the concept of Frankenstein, you have this mad scientist who creates a monster and the monster wreaks hell. And then they're like, oh my God, there's this big ass monster that just wreaked hell. The world has a way of doing this when it comes to the relationships between black parents and black children. So in other words, the black parents have tons of issues and problems that go untapped, unlooked at, unresearched, unanalyzed, and all the other things in between. And with all of these issues, toxicities, and other problems that they have, they create offspring. And that offspring becomes problematic as a result. And then what a lot of movies and what a lot of what we do in real life is we look at this individual and this monster that has been created, and we say they are the problem, they need to fix themselves. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that an individual who has been misraised, mistreated, misinformed, or has been abused does not have a responsibility to fill in the gaps. And I also want to steer clear of that language because the reality is that this individual doesn't have a choice but to do that. But that still does not mean that we should not look at who was the propagator of all these issues and who continues to be someone who is a problematic character or a problematic person that causes issues either in this person's life or just in general. And I say all that to say, when you look at somebody like Juanita, you can tell that her choices, her very poor choices, show that she ain't shit. Juanita has caused the central problems of this movie. And if you look at her behavior, the choices that she makes in the past and in the present, you can see how she created and spiraled a lot of the issues that you see in this movie. One thing that needs to be talked about when it comes to the Juanita character is the fact that they really didn't go too in depth with what happened with Jody's dad and Jody's brother. I mean, they talked about how his brother is no longer alive, but you really don't know the backstory. You could probably infer some things, deduce some things, but ultimately, you really don't know what happened there. But this is a very crucial point and something that we really need to focus on. When you are a woman, I mean, it really this applies for a man too, but in this context, we're going to say a woman because we're talking about Juanita. You have an obligation when you are going to create a child to do so with a parent who is going to be an appropriate and proper father for that child. What's happening in situations like with what Juanita did is she probably, I'm guessing just from what I see, was a young mother who got with dudes because they were gangster or they were hard or they were somebody who could be seen as a thug. And so most likely she got with a man who she found excitement from because he was a thug. Just like that was a big stereotype back in the day. It's still somewhat of a thing now, but like it was really a big stereotype back then that a real man would be somebody who was either thugging, was an athlete, some type of actor, or had some type of status. That's the way that, manhood basically was scaled, is what I'm getting at. Back then there wasn't a big movement of dating black nerds and all this other stuff. But the point I'm trying to make though is that Juanita was trying to get a dude who was a thug. It's clear by some of the things that she said in the movie, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But there's a good chance that the father either was dead or was locked up. And I thought that they said the father was dead, but I could be wrong about that. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, but I remember that regardless of the status of the father, he was absent. And as a result, Jody's brother ended up dead. That's because there was not a father there to set a proper example, and the mother was already making poor decisions, so she wasn't going to be a good enough example to offset that, let alone the idea that a single mother generally is not going to be able to raise a a group of boys to be men properly. That there's rarely a time where that is something that actually happens. So the point I'm trying to make is that Jody and his brother ended up not being shit because Juanita made poor decisions in the men that she decided to sleep around with. And when they produced Jody and his brother, they ended up the way they ended up, which for Jody's brother was him being dead, and for Jody, that was him basically being a fuckboy and a mama's boy. But we really need to go into that next. The next thing that we need to think about is this idea that the whole movie focuses on how Jody is a mama's boy, Jody is in love with his mama, or at least they're suggesting that there's an attraction, that he has an Oedipus complex and all this other shit. So the way that the movie frames it is that we should be mad at Jody for his decision to try to always be up under his mom. And don't get me wrong, Jody has fault here, and I don't want to get away from that point being true. But we need to look at it in the reverse. The issue isn't as much that Jody wants to be up under his mom versus this idea that Juanita raised him to want to be up under her. And we need to really look at that. The movie is not really telling you this, but consider the idea that with him not having an appropriate father figure, the only person who was there to raise him was his mom, so he was solely dependent on her. And it also created a confusing dynamic. Look at the entirety of their relationship. The mother was she had good maternal skills to a certain extent, but she also was the authoritarian by default because there was no dad in the picture. And also at the same time, she was trying to get Jody up out the house, but also conveniently was allowing him to stay as long as she did. She enabled his behavior and allowed him to stay, there while he was a grown man. Now, here's some things to consider with all of that. Jody was about 20 years old. So for most people in most black households, especially during that time period, there was a big thing of, by the time you're 18, it's expected that you get up out the house. I don't care if you go to school. I don't care if you get a job, but you're going to get up out of my house. Now, we can talk all day about whether or not that was problematic. I personally think that was a bit problematic. And obviously, we talk about those nuances more now than we did back in the day. But regardless, the point that I'm trying to make is that it was clear that she, at a certain point, wanted him out the house. But before that, she was cool with him being there and almost being somewhat of a substitute man. The thing that you all have to understand is that Yvette actually enabled this behavior because she wanted somewhat of a man in the house. And a lot of these single black mothers do this son husband thing where they, to a certain extent, make their son the man of the house when a man is not present. So this is exactly what Juanita did with Jody. She had Jody up in the crib because the brother is now dead. And then you also had it where there wasn't a dad in the crib at this point. So Jody was the man, and Jody was enabled to take on this role of being almost the mom's pseudo man, where, obviously he was on some pookie shit and he didn't have a job. He wasn't really doing anything productive. He was sitting at home watching Popeye on TV and shit. So obviously he's going to get stomped down on because he's a grown man and he's doing that and he's not doing anything productive, and the mom is letting him stay in the house. But also look at the idea that, one, Jody did not ask to be born. But even if we're considering the fact that he, is alive and he's doing what he's doing, his mother enabled him to have this behavior. She enabled him to stay in the crib because it was convenient for her. It was convenient for her to have somebody to make her feel like, she had a man to a certain extent, or at least some type of paternal figure. Now, the point where I believe that she actually wanted him out desperately was when she got Melvin. And we're going to talk about that in a minute and why that's problematic. But what I'm trying to get at is the minute she got Melvin is when she wanted him out. But before that, she actually was okay and highly, and if anything, she wanted him to stay there because, again, he filled a void and he filled a role until she was able to, get the man that she wanted. Remember, mama got to have a life too. And what that means is that once she finds a way to have the ideal life that she wants, she gets rid of the old baggage that she was holding on to that she used as a substitute until she could get what she wanted. And in this case, that was Jody being in the house. Now he's a burden. Another thing I wanted to bring up too is, as a result of her creating this confusing relationship dynamic, what it also created was confusion for Jody in his relationships. So let me explain what I mean by that. Oftentimes when you are a black man who is raised by a single black mother, especially if she is a shea butter mama. In this case, Juanita will fall into that category. But when you are raised by a shea butter mama, what ends up happening is you see her behavior. She's the first woman that you essentially fall in love with. Now, I'm not trying to be sick or nasty or weird, but essentially she's the first woman who gives you this impression of what you would idealize the woman in your life to be like. And generally, we would see that mother as a template for that. So in this case, she had mother-like skills. She had nurturing skills. She had some skills that were somewhat maternal. Like, again, she was able to clean up. She was good with taking care of the house and all this other stuff. But then she also had a certain level of authoritarianism. And she also, too, was very vocal. She had a potty mouth. She also was kind of feisty as well, too. So what happens is when a black man is in love with this image of having a woman like his mama, he finds women who mirror that. If you look at the Yvette character, she had a lot of similarities to Juanita. They acted very similar. Obviously Yvette was a bit of a less mature version of Juanita to a certain extent. She was feisty just like her. She was a good cook. She was good at cleaning up. She had some maternal skills. So it was almost as if he saw this motherly figure to a certain extent in Yvette. And he almost took her on as his woman because she mirrored a lot of the same traits that his mom did. So the mother, essentially, her behavior is something that this man ends up searching for. And it's interesting because in the reverse, it's almost as if part of that is he also knows this woman's taste because he knows his mother's taste. And we're going to get into that in a minute. And this is probably going to be the biggest reason why I believe that Juanita is problematic. But the point I'm trying to make, though, is that if you look at Juanita's taste, Juanita clearly likes dudes who are thugs. That is not a secret whatsoever. But then if you look at Yvette, she also likes thugs as well, too. Or she likes dudes who really don't have shit going on and ain't shit and really aren't in the picture, or she just doesn't really want in the picture. So there's a lot of similarities, again, between Yvette and her behavior and Juanita. So you can see that Jody is going after chicks who are just like his mom. The point I'm trying to make is that this spirals into other issues, problems, and other things that are basically happening here. The biggest reason why I believe that Juanita was the villain of this series is because, once again, you can see that although she may have created all these problems and she improperly raised Jody, you can see that she has not changed very much. Because there was a part where she was about to go on a date with Melvin and Jody was having a conversation with her. And this might have been the strongest point that Jody made in the entire movie. Most people look over it because there's so many other parts that people find interesting and funny. And there's also this desire of the world to see someone beat down on a black man who's not shit or is inconveniencing other people, specifically women, so they can live their best life. But at the same time, you have to understand that Jody made a lot of sense when he had that conversation with Juanita. And one of the things he made the most sense on was when she was talking about this going on a date with Melvin. It was clear that Jody had reserves about Melvin. He did not like him. He did not trust him. And some could argue that there was a power dynamic and that, there was this thing of him being used to being the man of the house, and now Melvin was trying to take on that role, so there was a power struggle there. I'm not denying that, but we'll get to what's wrong with that in a minute and how Melvin is being used as a decoy in order to avert your attention from a bigger issue. But the point I'm trying to make is that he brought up a good point here, which was that his mama tends to like thugs. Because he even said that. He said, "You like them thugs, mama." He said, "That's just a problem," basically. And so when Jody said that, her response was, "Your daddy was a thug." So she was now doubling down on this. She now is asserting that Jody is correct and almost basically saying that this is something that she still wants to a certain extent. Yet his dad is not even in the picture. His dad is lost. Like, where's Waldo? Like, this dude is nowhere to be found. So the type of dudes that you like are dudes who can't even get in the picture and won't even raise their son, so that you're stuck to raise that kid by yourself. Those are the types of dudes that you like, because a lot of those thugs dudes basically knock you up and they're not really trying to be in their son's life and all this other shit. In this case, this dude was clearly not trying to be in Jody's life. And this is the type of dude who she still wants. The point I'm trying to make is that Jody made a good point by also saying that, well, why does he have to be a thug? And she basically said, I just need a dude who can handle me. So again, she's now asserting her problems once again. She's showing you all the problems that she has. Because with her saying, I need a dude who can handle me, she's showing that she is a bit much. That she is somebody who is problematic. She is somebody who is going to be an issue for men in general. So now this is also showing layers that she could have been a problem in that relationship as well too. It may not have been just a thing of she was dating a thug and the thug wasn't shit, or the dudes who she was kicking it weren't shit. But she herself was also not shit as well too. So she's revealing that by saying, I need you to be able to handle me. What do you mean handle you? Handle you being what? Being abrasive, irritating, mouthy, and all this other stuff that men just don't want to deal with? It's clear that there were these issues there. And she's also asserting that this is still a thing now in this moment. And then Jody even countered and he said, why can't you get one of those blue collar brothers, with the briefcase? Nobody's going to pay attention to that. But he even suggested, why not go after a straight-laced dude, like a dude who isn't in the streets? Like, why not go for a regular dude who can just go and get and just who has a regular job and is just a regular, everyday brother. Now, one could infer that Jody still would have showed a certain level of jealousy, but I believe that Jody was actually pinpointing a problem that Juanita was kind of blowing by the wayside. And that now brings me to the Melvin character. Now, a lot of people like the Melvin character because they believe that he was a good, almost father figure-like character who was putting Jody in his place. But I saw him slightly differently. Like, I understand the parts where he was knowledgeable, where he was street smart, and where he was also right. And I acknowledge those things. But also, you have to look at the Melvin character from this standpoint. Melvin's character was a decoy who was trying to distract you from a bigger issue. That bigger issue that they were trying to distract you from was this idea that the mission here was to create a almost Captain Save-A-Ho narrative. So oftentimes these different movies and TV shows, whenever they put black men in a positive light, they make them somewhat of a simp. In this case, we're going to make Melvin somewhat of a simp, but we're going to take it in a different direction because they didn't do it the traditional way, but they still kind of went in that direction. Melvin was playing the role of the simp who was doing some Captain Save-A-Ho isms. What I mean by that is sometimes you have these dudes who are put in certain positions only to be the individual who beats up on another dude who they've already villainized. Jody has already been villainized in this movie. He's been made to seem like a dude who just wasn't shit, when he essentially was just a young 20-year-old dude who was immature. And they beat down on him the entire movie for it. I'm not mad about you beating down on him. It is what it is. But my problem with that is if you look at something like when young black women are immature, they get to use the young and dumb cop-out as if it's a get-out-of-jail-free card when they do stupid shit and nobody bats an eye about it. But if a young black man makes mistakes and he's immature and he has a lot of learning and progressing to do, it's time to just beat up on him. So what they do sometimes in these movies is they get other male characters to do the beating, like literally all of the beating. And Melvin served the purpose of that. That's why they put him in the movie. But here's the thing about the Melvin character. He still proved Jody's point to Juanita, which is that she tends to like thugs. No matter how many ways you try to slice it, or no matter how many ways you try to look at it, Melvin was the thug that Jody said he was, and more. Think about it. This was a man who was beating on his woman. This was a man who had neglected to take care and see his kids. This was a man who low-key was booty warrior, if we're just being honest. I mean, we can tell this Negro was out there getting cheeks while he was in prison. Think about when he got into that little scuffle with Jody, and he said, if we was in prison, I'd make you get on your knees and fix it. And then he called him a scared little chocolate bitch, and he licked him on top of his head. This Negro was out here clapping cheeks while he was in prison. Let's just be real. He was the dude who was getting booty, not giving it. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that you could tell that he was a thug and that there were problems with him. There also was this thing of, remember when he like put weed in the mom's garden? That was another thing that was problematic too. Like, why do something like that? And Jody actually did not do that, but they almost scapegoated it so that they can kind of focus back on the fact that Jody wasn't shit. But in that moment, the biggest problem was that Melvin was doing shit that he really shouldn't have been doing in the mom's garden. So Jody, once again, was right. And even when Jody brought it up to his mom, what did she do? She deflects. She's like, shut up, Jody. I need you to shut up. You know, she was doing all that bullshit. And that's because she couldn't take accountability. So it's clear that Juanita not only makes poor decisions, not only causes more generations of trauma and issues and all this other stuff, but she also doesn't take accountability very well for the issues and the problems that she causes. Because even the scuffle between Melvin and Jody, that was also an issue as well too. Because the whole idea of them going back and forth, think about it. Every time that Jody had said something to Melvin, although it was funny when Melvin was beating his ass and Melvin was always getting him God, and Melvin was always one-upping him, and he was also winning in this power struggle. And we all loved it, and we loved to see Jody get told. At the same time, notice he didn't really do a very good job of countering most of Jody's points. When Jody made all the points that he made about Melvin and his kids and doing research on him and stuff like that, he didn't counter all that. He just got aggressive with Jody and a little bit, you know, homo aggressive is what I'm going to call it. Homo aggressive with Jody to a certain extent. And also too, even in that moment where he was talking about the whole, the weed thing in the garden, Melvin was laughing, and he had kind of, when Jody said, what are you laughing at? And he said, yo, spoiled ass. That was Melvin once again deflecting. So Melvin had a really hard time with almost eating the things that Jody was saying, because Jody actually was telling the truth in both of those moments. But the movie did not want you to see that. They wanted you to see that, again, Jody was a bum. Jody wasn't about shit. Jody was somebody who really was a useless character who took up space. The last thing that I want to say is that Juanita was pretty selfish as well too. And I'll give you two reasons why she was selfish. Because even when Jody supposedly got his shit together, let's be real, he didn't really get his shit together. I mean, he knocked Yvette up again. But anyway, even when Jody kind of got his shit together, as the movie implied, when he asked his mama if she needed anything, does she need some money? She was like, yeah, 20 years worth. So the mama wasn't even on some, oh no, you do what you're going to do with your life. You have your own life to live, because she kept emphasizing that as a point. But the minute he had brought up he was going to give his mama some money and whatnot, she was like, well, yeah, like I want 20 years worth, blah, 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 blah. See, that shows you that she's selfish. So that means that she had Jody and most likely her brother, because they were going to be these men who were going to grow up to take care of her to a certain extent if there wasn't a man who came in to take care of her instead, and was also going to give her the other things they could fulfill. See, obviously, you know, the brother and Jody couldn't fulfill the sexual portions of what she would need in a man, like someone like a Melvin would, but they could maybe help take care of all the other obligations, like the financial ones and other things. So in other words, she had kids to try to fulfill a financial and living obligation, so that she's using her kids to some extent as an ATM. The other way that I would say that she was selfish too was when Yvette, who was also weird and like real reckless, had JoJo up in the crib with a bunch of thugs and shit like that. Juanita wasn't there talking about some, oh, bring the baby over here, I'll take care of, him and all this other stuff, yada, yada, yada. So you didn't even give a damn about your grandchild and the fact that your grandchild was up here with a bunch of thugs and shit like that, because you see that you have two irresponsible ass parents who can't even take care of the kid. You was just trying to live your life because, again, mama got to have a life too. What that shows you is that she didn't have kids because she wanted to raise a family. She had kids because she probably was some type of jump off who done got knocked up and then as a result had kids. And she was like, okay, let me just take care of these niggas until they can get out the crib. Let's be real. We know that was the mentality. There's no other reason to try to argue against it, because the reality is that this isn't something that just happens in movies like Baby Boy. This is the reality for a lot of parents in our real lives, whether you want to admit it or whether you don't. All right, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say, and I definitely will have more to come, so make sure that you stay tuned. Other than that, I'll talk to you later. Peace.